Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to do an introduction to WISER. To start, let's begin by talking about Ellen Galinsky's study of children. She asks kids ages 8 to 18 years old, once every 2 years, what are you most worried about? And wouldn't you know, 65%, 2 out of 3 kids are most worried about mom and dad. They wish that mom and dad were less stressed and less tired. So it's not just healthcare, but let's zero it in to you guys. Let me ask you guys some questions. Number one, how many of you in the past week skipped a meal? Anybody? I certainly did. Stress-induced meal skipping is not dieting. How many of you ate a poorly balanced meal? Me again. How many of you worked an entire shift or day without any breaks? Me again. How about changed personal or family plans because of work? That's me. Or how about this one? Got home late from work. This is usually where some snarky person in the back room says, hey man, define late, man. My answer to you is late at my house is the same as late at your house. It's whatever the hell your spouse says it is. That's what late is. And I've got 4 kids, and if I'm 1 minute late, I'm putting all kids to bed by myself that night. That's what late is. How many of you drank too much coffee at some point in the past week? Yes, if you have to ask how much is too much, that's probably the wrong question. And then my favorite, how many of you got less than 5 hours of sleep at some point in the last 7 days? If you fall into that bucket, interestingly, you're not alone. 32% of the Brits, but 40% of Americans routinely, that is once a week, they get less than 5 hours of sleep in a night. And if you fall into that bucket, if you're one of these people, you're twice as likely to die of heart disease, and you're 1.7 times as likely to die of all causes. And the part of your brain, right here behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain that allows you to be socially and emotionally appropriate, right? You can be kind, you can think through situations. That part of your brain shuts down if you've gotten less than 5 hours of sleep, or you've been awake for 35 continuous hours. I mean, it's true. I don't care if you're Mother Teresa. If you have been awake for 40 hours, you know, you're a jerk. That's the biology of the way the brain works. It's not like it's necessarily something you're doing on purpose. For the past 10 years, we've been conducting research on how to help healthcare workers recover from burnout. And we selected from the 200 published interventions on this, the 6 that our healthcare worker colleagues enjoy doing the most. They're most likely to finish it. And from that, we developed WISER. Why WISER? Because WISER acknowledges that burnout is prevalent. It's everywhere in healthcare. It's bad for our patients, it's bad for healthcare providers, and it's treatable using current evidence-based methods and tools, and it's not as hard as you might think. What WISER does is it packages together all that we know about the best available evidence, makes it simple and easy for people who are busy, tired, kind of cranky healthcare workers to get access to this best available evidence and tools. Let me give you some examples. We did this at Johns Hopkins with ICU nurses. We found that half of them, 48.8% of them, already met the diagnostic criteria for emotional exhaustion or burnout. We found that 2 out of 3 of them had difficulty sleeping, and 1 out of 4 were clinically depressed. This is concerning because 6 to 8% of the general population are depressed, but it's 24.4% of adult ICU nurses. Yikes. What does it look like for physicians when we go and we look at this at the national level? It's 30 to 40% of physicians, practicing physicians in the U.S. meet the diagnostic criteria for burnout syndrome. For nurses, it's very similar. 34% of nurses meet the diagnostic criteria for burnout syndrome. So it's 1 out of 3. Look left, you look right, you look in the mirror, one of them is burned out. In fact, it's not just burnout. We know from Miss Mailer's study, she showed actually that PTSD is highly common in ICU work. So 18% of ICU nurses met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. That's very similar to the 24% of returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. That means working in an ICU looks a lot like being downrange for extended deployments, being blown up and shot at, which is 24% of returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's 18% of our ICU nurses. This is not an environment where we've made available to people resources related to health and well-being. It's an environment in the ICU where we've taken these resources away from healthcare worker. What do we know about burnout? It's associated with lower patient satisfaction, with higher infection rates, with more medication errors, and with higher standardized risk-adjusted mortality ratios. We don't want this for our patients, and we don't want this for us. Let me talk about what we mean by for us. I'm going to show you some images. I'm going to flash some images. So tell me what you see here, because burnout doesn't just affect your patient satisfaction and patient infection rates. It also impacts the way you view the world. So what do you see here? Do you see an alligator? Do you see a squirrel? Let's try another one. What do you see here? Is that rope? Is that a snake? How about one more? What do you see? Interestingly, if we play fear-inducing music, like Alfred Hitchcock, types of soundtrack, versus no music, versus happy music, if we induce fear in participants, they are more likely to see threat, significantly more likely to see threat in ambiguous objects. And the same thing happens when you're burned out. You are primed for threat. You're primed for stressors. There's that saber-toothed tiger chasing me. I better get away from it. Everything, if it's not going to kill me, I'm going to ignore it because something's going to kill me right now. When you're burned out, you're looking for the negative. And when you're doing this resilience training, like we're doing at WISER, you're regaining your ability to see the good when it's there. To not pretend, but to see the good when it is there and not interpret things that are ambiguous as things that are bad. So what else is burnout associated with? Well, you don't live as long when you're burnt out. So there's shorter lifespan, there's lower relationship satisfaction, marital satisfaction, you have more experiences with difficult colleagues when you're burned out. We also have a compromised immune system function when we're emotionally exhausted or burned out. We are more likely to injure ourselves, to get into accidents, to hobble around on crutches or have an arm in a sling. We're more likely to get into traffic accidents or speeding tickets when we're burned out. And we're much more likely to have issues with our work-life balance, sleep quality, sleep quantity, clinical depression, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, within the past year when you're burned out than when you're not. And more to the point, let me give you the hallmarks of burnout in the general population, so outside of the healthcare workforce, but in the general population, what makes you more likely to be burned out? Well, if you agree with the following statements. Number one, you try to be everything to everyone. Does that ring a bell? How about you get to the end of a hard day of work and you feel like you've not made a meaningful difference? Meaning and purpose is a big one when it comes to burnout. How about this next one? You feel like the work you're doing is not recognized. Oh, you're not being acknowledged for what it is that you're contributing. How about this fourth one? You identify so strongly with work that you lack a reasonable balance between your work and your personal life. That's number four. We got three more. Number five, your job varies between monotony and chaos. Some people say it's just chaos all the time. How about number six? You feel you have little or no control over your work. That can lead you to become emotionally exhausted. And then number seven, last but not least, is you work in healthcare. Yes, that's right. If you work in healthcare, that puts you into a category of United States citizens who are statistically significantly more likely to be burned out just by manner of their profession. If you drive a bus for a living and suddenly you find yourself caring for an elderly parent or a sick child, you become a healthcare worker, you too become more vulnerable to burnout. That's the way burnout works. It's socially, emotionally, cognitively, physically, spiritually draining in ways that you just don't have time to replenish those reserves in between draining encounters. So, if you're interested in WISER, I double dog dare you to take out your phone and check out this little text message. Send a text message to the following number. Just get your phone and start a new text message. And start a new text message to the number 73940, 73940, and type in the following message. See here. And we will send you a link. There it is right there. And that link, if you click it, you can register. It's the informed consent for the study. You can register for this study. You can share it with other people that you work with, or you can completely ignore it. It's totally up to you. But thank you for tuning in to this introduction to WISER today.